Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday night. I am your host, Wes, of Refounding Fathers, and I absolutely love this show. It is so much fun. I'm going to switch my mic here over to what I got this here that Alex bought me a few months ago. But yeah, I'm so thrilled to be joined on this show by Kyle, my libertarian friend. It's good to see you, brother. How are you?
Hey man, glad to be here. Thank you.
And then Chris. Chris has always been active on our page really since we started. And I love having you on the page, Chris, as a liberal, as a Democrat. We get to go back and forth and we get to try to find that discussion, that civil debate. So welcome back to the show as always, Chris.
Thank you. I love your page. It's very refreshing, and there's a reason I stuck around for so long.
I appreciate it, man. And it's been kind of hopping this week. I was looking, I think we've had like 80 different comments on just one post alone, and we've had several. We, of course, did our election show and, all the drama that went on with that. And then I thought this week that we would get into a Texas lawsuit that has been supported by almost 20 different other states that was challenging the election results. And Trump came out with a tweet, and I'm showing you pictures of it here, saying this is the big one. This is it that's going to invalidate potentially up to four different states, the battleground states that went for Biden. And you can see just an image, that cover image of the brief that was filed. And the way that this was set up, it was going to go straight to the Supreme Court. And I was going to spend, like Thursday night or, Saturday morning, just like reading through this entire thing. And then this happened. It was thrown out for lack of standing. I mean, basically, you get more or less a one pager from the Supreme Court that just absolutely did not hear the case, threw it out, didn't even make it into their consideration in terms of the details because they said you don't have the standing to bring this before us. And when you think of a conservative court, I guess at least on the right there was this assumption that there'd be more consideration given. I mean, I admit I certainly thought that, and to see it cut loose this quickly has sent a lot of people spinning. And I posted the question here, which I think is what has caused a lot of the debate among folks: is this the end of Trump's legal challenge to the election? So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Start with you, Kyle. What do you make of this whole situation, and do you see this as the end of Trump's legal battle to overturn, the results that were announced anyway? What do you think, man?
Well, it certainly is a mess. That's for sure. I hope that it is the end of Trump's, I guess, questioning or controversial stance on trying to get things overturned.
Yeah.
Listen, there's malfeasance going on. We do need to find a way to sort that out to make sure that it doesn't happen. We want to have free and fair elections, of course. But I think, at least based on the evidence of this case, the Supreme Court did not think that there was sufficient evidence to hear that. And I have no reason to question that myself. So, I think this should spell the end of Trump's challenge, but
Yeah.
I got a sneaky suspicion some things are coming down.
Well, I guess, I mean, what do you think in terms of fraud? Do you think that there's any type of grounding there or further investigation that needs to happen? Or are you more on the side of, look, it's been overstated and doesn't exist and Trump needs to move on? Is that kind of where you're at?
No, I think that we do need to have probably a bipartisan or nonpartisan inquiry and investigation into alleged acts of fraud. I think there have been several documented cases that have proven out to be true.
Yeah.
A lot that haven't been. So, but yeah, it's a non-political, which I don't even know how we would get to that point, quite honestly. But to make it as nonpartisan as possible, investigation, inquiry, or whatever, to make sure that those things don't happen.
Yeah, I mean, they did that, in the previous election in 2016, and they, because Trump was talking about the popular vote, and he was saying there's no way
Right.
Hillary won this, but then there was a commission, and they essentially came up with nothing. You've had the attorney general come out and say, I don't see any systemic fraud, but of course, like
Right.
this is what I've always said, guys. It's like there is fraud and imperfections in every election because even if you've got the best system, which I don't know if Dominion is, you still like leaving this up to all these different states to certify their elections. You think about the people that are doing this, and I'm sure amazing people, really great folks that are doing this on behalf of their country. But at the same time, anybody is subject to making a mistake. And then I'm sure there are people who, I mean, there's documented cases of people who want to vote numerous times that have happened. The question is whether it's systemic. Is whether this is actually enough
So
to overturn it. Go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, no. So I think the issue that Republicans really need to be focusing on here, and they'll be yelled at for voter suppression by the left for sure. But the issue that Republicans need to really take is to have a standardized process of voting in federal elections, right? Have a certain cutoff date for registration, or leave it open. But the way that we leave it up to states, which as a libertarian, I'm being a bad libertarian here, which shouldn't be a shocker because I'm not a very good libertarian. Um, but honestly, for federal elections, maybe someone could make the case, and Republicans need to be making the case to have some sort of standardized process for either registration, or you can register up to a certain time and then vote, or have complete mail-in ballots or something. We've got to get to it. We got to get to a better system for sure.
What do you think, Chris? Because a lot of times when we talk about federalizing the election a lot more or cutting dates off, I think a lot of times on the left they would talk about you're disenfranchising voters. It wasn't that long ago that Democrats were saying, "Hey, there's all this interference in the election, Russian interference. It's illegitimate." Now it's like, there's nothing to see here. Everything's fine. So where do you stand on this whole debate?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily oppose federalizing elections. I'm curious if that would end up federalizing elections in the way many conservatives seem to want, which would involve, obviously
Yeah.
more checks such as voter ID and maybe less liberal elections overall. However, either way, it would require a constitutional amendment, since the Constitution does give states the power
Yeah.
to hold
Yeah, it
elections.
would. You're right. Yeah.
I'm also curious, I would not oppose investigations, bipartisan investigations into voter fraud. But again, I'm just curious if that would deliver the results that Republicans want. And history has shown then that when those investigations don't deliver the results Republicans want, Republicans just ignore the results, as they did in that 2016 investigation that you mentioned, Wes.
Can you imagine if this had really come down to Pennsylvania? That's what I thought. Like, I thought on election night and the couple days after, I was like, if Arizona goes for Trump, North Carolina obviously went for Trump. I thought Georgia was going to go for Trump. I was really surprised when they didn't. But if it really came down to Pennsylvania and like Philadelphia, and all eyes were on it the way that Florida happened in 2000. I really think that the Supreme Court would probably be more apt to hear this. But what we're talking about is, we're not even talking about the popular vote. The popular vote went for Biden. I don't think anybody really contests that. But we're talking about numerous different states. And I thought this was the best shot that the Trump administration had, for calling this into question. And you had conservative justices. You had Alito and Thomas writing the response saying, we're not going to even hear this. So I don't know where the Trump administration goes from here. There's been talk about Trump. Go ahead. Sorry.
It was interesting because Alito and Thomas did like mildly dissent, where they said, I think we should have heard this case. But then they also said we could not possibly have granted the relief that the state of Texas is asking for. Yeah. So it makes me wonder, like, why even hear the case if you cannot give the relief? And it just seems, the defense of many of the Republicans who signed on to this this brief was that, we need to find out the facts. We need to let the legal process play itself out. But I feel like that fundamentally misstates the purpose of lawsuits. Lawsuits are not investigations. The purpose of lawsuits is to win and to seek the relief and to get the relief that you wanted, which in this case would have involved disenfranchising thousands of voters. Yeah. So I think the justifications for it just really don't fly for me.
I guess that's what's hard to see right now is like, people on the right, a lot of conservatives really don't believe that there were that many people who voted for Biden. I think we talked about it. There was like reports and studies of people who were voting for Biden, but they weren't going to tell like their spouse about it. The people that voted for Biden, by and large, did not attend rallies the way that people did for Trump.
So you're saying they have a silent majority?
Yeah, I really am. It's shifted. That's a great way to put it, Chris. It's like the people who voted for Biden were very quiet about it. Many of them clearly voted by mail, and it's a very different dynamic because when we've heard the silent majority is what Trump uses to refer to us conservatives as people who have not had, access to the cultural institutions. But now we do. I mean, if you really look at many of the institutions now, the Supreme Court is conservative. That I mean, how many Republicans lost elections in the House of Representatives? Zero, right? Like
That's right.
the Senate is likely to remain in Republican hands. We'll see. We'll see. It could go to the left, but the presidency has been ours for the past 4 years. I mean, Chris, I would even say in media. I mean, Fox News has been on the top. Having until very recently, of course, having some of its top ratings and biggest revenues. So we've had access to a lot more institutions in the media and things like that. I mean, some of the up and coming universities are conservative. I mean, obviously, Liberty's gone through a lot of trials recently, but still an up and coming university. I could think of several others, Notre Dame, things like that. And so, yeah, and then you see, and yet we're losing this election. So I think it's just hard to register that for a lot of us to realize that there is. And then I guess my struggle, you guys, was where does the conservative movement go from here? It's like so let's say that there is this belief that there's widespread election fraud. Does that mean that we continue to vote? Like does that mean we continue to use this system, or do we resort to violence? And you're starting to see some of that. For the longest time, us as conservatives, our whole mantra has been, well, we're not like the left, we're not violent. We have peaceful protest, and in most cases, I would argue that's been true. But I think you're starting to see some of that slip, like the rallies in D.C. that just happened, where they did turn violent. Where do we go if not to elections in the Supreme Court as conservatives, if we believe the system is corrupt? That's kind of a scary thought for me, to be honest with you. I don't know. I don't know. So it's just something that we're going to have to sort out as the conservative movement going forward. But what really frustrates me the most is that there's so many good things that came out of this election that are kind of being glossed over.
Overshadowed,
Yeah, just the minority, like the number of women who ran as Republicans who came in, ethnical minorities who came in, so many gains that happened. And yeah, we're not talking about any of it. We're still talking about this. So what do you think? What do you guys think is going to happen over the next month? Do you think that Trump will concede? Do you think that there'll be like a peaceful, change of power, or is he going to essentially protest this and start holding rallies while Biden's supposed to be inaugurated? What do you guys think, Kyle?
No, I think that he's gonna evacuate the White House. Fortunately, and to the demise of the Republican Party, likely he's not going to go anywhere. He's likely to be holding rallies for a 2024 campaign, or 2024 campaign as early as January, if he hasn't already had them scheduled yet. And that's going to really damage and hinder the Republican Party in 2024, 2028. Republicans are going to have to find a way to distance themselves from Trump. Again, this was a rejection of Trump, not Trumpism. Some of the things that like the tax cuts, a lot of different things that Trump policies are things that are very popular. And so those things can stick around and we can rally around those things, or the Republicans can at least. But man, I think they've got to distance themselves from Trump.
I mean, it's going to be absolutely fascinating if you think like 2-3 years from now when we start gearing up for like a nomination process, primaries and things like that. Is it going to be just Trump against no one, or is it actually going to be a huge divide? I mean, you can see that with the news. I mentioned Fox News, and now Newsmax, right, is growing as many people like leave Fox News and start to shift over, and we'll see like what happens. But if Trump were to take over Newsmax, or if he's to develop his own network, how's that going to happen? So. Does that cause? I mean, I'm curious. What do you think? Do you consider Trump to be defeated permanently, or does he, in your mind, hold a legitimate threat to a Biden administration a couple of years from
now? Is that directed to me or Chris?
Chris, sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I think he remains a threat not only to Biden but to the Republican Party, to America, to our notions of democracy. He has convinced so many people that there is widespread fraud, and that goes back to this belief that Biden couldn't possibly have won because his rallies weren't as big. And if you believe that way, it's because you have been sheltered in this bubble and this ecosystem that has only been telling you what you want to hear. I mean, pollsters have been predicting Biden's win for a year now. Trump is historically unpopular. He did not win the popular vote in 2016. He's been trailing in the polls for a year. He discouraged his voters from voting by mail in the middle of a pandemic. All of the signs pointing to a Biden win were there. That didn't mean we had it locked and loaded. I was still very nervous on election night. But this deep belief that Biden could not possibly have won, therefore this whole system is corrupt and democracy failed us, that is going to motivate violence. There's no way around it. In order for that to change, the beliefs have to change, which means the media ecosystem and the narratives that these people are absorbing have to change, and the people peddling them have to be held accountable.
Yeah, no, a couple of things. So you mentioned beliefs, and I think that's really important, is that there's this kind of like personality worship of Trump, but really what I think what is at the bottom of that is this belief system that existed before he ran. I really think he tapped into what Sarah Palin had, and you could trace that back as far as you want. There's some great awesome resources on that. But it's a belief system. It's a belief system that I'm going to stick up for the working class, the people that are rejected by the elites, that feel like they're disenfranchised, especially people who come from a certain class and ethnicity, and that I'm going to fight political correctness. I mean, that's what it all goes back to. Sarah Palin was politically correct because she wasn't educated, in all the right schools and things like that. And, she's sitting there with Katie Couric, and she's sitting next to someone who's very polished and professional. She's not. And then Trump took that, I think, to a much, more intentional level. And so someone else could fill those shoes easily, like one of his sons, his daughter could easily inherit that movement, but he's not gone. He could be, you think whatever happens in a Biden administration, he's going to come and say, hey, do you want to go back to my way, or do you want to continue living in this? He's got the ability to set up an entire news network, right? Like Newsmax is doing that for him. So it's going to be around for a very long time. And there are legitimate things that he spoke to that should be incorporated in a Republican platform. But what concerns me is the rule of law, right? And that's where I would honestly side more with the Supreme Court justices than I would Trump in this case, because there's kind of this expectation that you bend the rules or you ignore, right, some of these overarching principles on behalf of the political candidate that you support. And that's not how America was set up. And what bothers me is that so many conservative leaders today are starting to think like, hey, this country doesn't work anymore. We can't have any liberals anymore. We can't have a conversation between the two of us anymore. Democracy doesn't work. The rule of law doesn't work. We just hate each other. We need to start our own little conservative country. And I think that's incredibly irresponsible and dangerous. I mean, we demonstrate that, you guys, every Sunday night here, that we can't have a conversation even if we disagree on things as important as this or as unimportant as, DC versus Marvel, right? Like you need that discussion. That's what brings flavor to life and can help you see your blind spots in this country. As we start to move apart from each other based on this leadership, I think it's very dangerous, and frankly, it's un-American because our country was built by people of various different beliefs. So that's my thoughts on it. Guys, thanks so much for being here. We got a lot more to talk about as we head into the holidays. We're going to have some more posts over the next week. I'm sure that we'll continue to bring all kinds of comments and controversy, but I want to give each of you the last word here. Go ahead, Kyle. Anything else you want to wrap up here from our review of the Texas case?
Sure. There's, what's interesting to me is not necessarily the result of the Texas case. I think that most people could understand that it was not going to go very far. And we didn't get to really talk about it tonight, but I'm actually really interested in some of the comments that came out. I know Chris had a couple of things he wanted to talk about. The Newt Gingrich comment, for example, or the Alan West comment, where he's talking about, maybe a group of constitutionally similar states who will abide by the Constitution should just secede and form their own country. I think that those kind of things are interesting to talk about, in light of this sort of thing. But I think you're right. I think that we at least set an example for what can be had as a conversation. But, truthfully, I don't know if the three of us could get together. Could we govern well? I don't know.
Maybe not. Maybe not. How about you, Chris?
DC is just objectively better than Marvel. I mean, we
agreed. Agreed. Are we on the same page with that one? Nice.
We might be. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got maybe something for us to explore too in this show, as we start to move on from the election coverage and things, is kind of exploring the roots of our belief systems. And essentially, I mean, I think there's this assumption that America was built by conservatives, and conservatives have been integrally a part of it from John Adams on. But I would never claim that they've been exclusively the ones who've built it, right? I don't consider Thomas Jefferson to be much of a conservative, definitely not Thomas Paine, and numerous others from FDR, Woodrow Wilson. So many others have had important roles in this country, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but it's not been built just by conservatives. So for us to say, hey, we're just going to expel liberals from it, it's against the fabric of this country. It's
That's
simply
right.
At what point do you hit an extreme level, whatever belief system you are, that you are starting to fight that fabric. And that's what concerns me about some conservatives, not all, obviously, but there are some of these edges where if you start to violently fight a system and an electoral process in which voter fraud has not yet been proven to be widespread, then you're essentially going against that rule of law that our founding fathers built up. But the same thing for the left. I look at people who want to radically alter this country and push it as far left as possible, as someone who, again, it was never built to be a socialist country.
That's
and
right.
Wanting to go from welfare and things like that are in the Constitution to, undermining the means of production, or completely shifting those to government, oversight that is very dangerous. So anyway, that's a lot to talk about, guys. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much for being on the show. We'll see you next week. We'll start getting into these other topics. Looks like we had about 7 or 8 folks watching live, which is awesome for us. Take a look at our website, theberkingconservative.com. You can see all of our past episodes of Refounding Fathers. Feel free to write us on our email, theberkingconservative@gmail.com. Leave us some comments for Chris, Kyle, and myself. We'll be happy to answer those on our next show. So thanks again, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.